About a year and a half ago, we gave our 60-inch Sony LCD TV to my son. He could use it for games. It was 20 years old, and it was time to get a new one. So I started designing a stand for the new Sony X95J 65-inch. We figured going from a 60 to a 65 would be a good step. And I started building the stand. I kept waiting for them to put it on sale, but they never did. Finally, Black Friday rolled around, and they put the 75-inch on sale. So we decided to buy the 75-inch. And the only issue was it wasn't going to fit the stand that I had already started building. So modifications were in order. What you'll see is the build for that entire process. Video is kind of long, so you'll see most of the steps, and some of them may look repeated, but there's a lot of sanding, a lot of spraying, and I hope you get something out of this. Hope maybe you learn something. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. So here is the entire build process, and it came out looking nice. So enjoy. Thanks for watching. You'll see the 65-inch legs were perfect for the stand, but that wouldn't work for the 75. So I had to use the center position, but I didn't design it to support that weight in the center. Here's the original setup, our temporary. Here's a side view of the new build with the angle for the center channel to the main listening point. I bought some cherry paint grade because I wanted the sapwood. Cut everything to length, jointed the edges, lots of edges. And then cut the boards to width and jointed them again so that I could use biscuits to align the joints for gluing. Marking for biscuits. Cutting the biscuit slots. There are 2 boards for the top shelf, 3 boards for the center shelf, and 4 boards for the bottom shelf. I have a friend that has a cabinet shop. They have a 24-inch planer and wide belt sander. So when I have boards that are too wide to run through my planer, then they run them for me. Then I brought everything back to our shop and ran through the drum sander. Lots and lots of time with the drum sander. And I wanted the edges to be thicker and have more support, so that's what these boards are for. And this again is just cherry. And for a design element, I angled each end. and I use Biscuits for alignment there. And here's a little tip if you didn't already know, but you can sprinkle a little bit of table salt on the glue joint and that'll keep the boards from slipping. It doesn't take much. And then I cut each shelf to width so they were all the same. And cut the angles off on each corner. And as you're aware, when the battery dies, everything stops. And this is something that I've done before, but it's been a while, so I did a test piece to thin some glue and put it on the veneer and the substrate. And I prefer to do 3 coats, let it dry. I sped it up with the heat gun. So there's 3 coats of glue, all dried and rolled out so that it's smooth. And when the glue is fully dry, you can take an iron and reactivate the glue, and it works great. Sticks really good. That's the technique that I'll use to glue the Curly Koa onto the edges of the shelves. And here's the final cut for width to cut the back off and ensure that all 3 shelves are the same width. And my helper is fantastic. And cutting the shelves to length. And again, running through the drum sander to ensure that all the shelves are the same thickness after gluing the edge boards on. I use the drum sander a lot. Marking for holes for mounting the legs and drilling the holes. And I was pretty pleased that all 3 shelves came out this close to each other. Drilling the pocket holes so we can get the fasteners in place for the legs. And cutting the Ambrosia Curly Maple for the legs that'll later be cut on the CNC. The back leg will be cherry. Doesn't need to be the Ambrosia Curly Maple. And running those through the drum sander to ensure that they're all the same thickness and that they're smooth. Did I mention that I use the drum sander a lot? And this is cutting the profile for the legs. I use the blue tape and super glue method to hold these. It worked great, but I learned on the first piece that I need to take my right angle locator out of the picture because the cutoff pieces can get jammed in there and break the bit. Like that. And I believe I cut these at 175 inches per minute. And that is a 1/4 inch compression bit. I did the original design in Corel Draw and transferred it to Fusion 360 to do the CAD work and CAM work. Rounding the edges on the legs. This is to cut the dados on the legs, cut all of them at once. And this is a 1/4 inch downcut bit, also running at 175 inches per minute. I had to make sure I had adequate clearance to clear all the clamps, but I set that up in Fusion 360. And sometimes I get a little too close with the shop vac. Marking for cutting the holes on the legs. And drilling the holes for the hanger bolts. And this is the initial running in of the threads to make sure nothing split and that everything was going to work. And then I took them back out. I needed to make a constant curve to do an inlay on the front of the shelves, so I bent a stir stick from Starbucks. I cut the outline so that nothing would splinter. And I used a 1/8 inch down cut bit in my Dremel to cut a relief for the medallions to go there. And cut the medallions out of Curly Maple. And again, I used Fusion 360 to do this. And they fit. The gap is to allow for the veneer. And then I ran all the screws in for the final time. And we put it together. It was putting this together that I realized my fingers don't fit in the pockets, so I had to make some changes. I had to cut a relief so that I could get a wrench on those and get my fingers in there. And then I sanded everything, lots and lots of sanding. I found a dent, not sure how I dented it, but I wanted to steam the dent out. If you've never steamed a dent out, this is how you do it. And it worked pretty good. There's a dark spot there, but it actually is completely level. And I like using a veneer saw for doing this. I could use a razor, but I just like the veneer saw. Might take a little longer, but I still like it. I actually bought this Curly Koa veneer in the late 80s, early 90s, and was saving it for a special project. This is putting sealer on the underside and top side. Obviously on the underside so there would be finish there. And on the top side, I wanted sealer so that when I glued the veneer on, the glue would not get into the pores of the wood. Using veneer softener to soften and allow me to shape the Curly Koa for the edge. And the plastic is obviously to keep it from soaking into the wood. So this is getting ready to apply the glue like I did in the test. So I'll put 3 coats on the edge, 3 coats on the veneer, and roll it out after each time so there are no bubbles. And a close-up of what that looks like. And here we are gluing or using heat to apply the veneer. It works really well to stick the veneer in place. Trimming the veneer flush with the top. And here's where I made a mistake. I cut this in a conventional cut and didn't realize that it was chipping the veneer. This is the bottom shelf, and you can see it chipped out in quite a few places. I didn't show it. I don't think I even videoed it, but there's a lot of repair that I had to do to fix that. So from that point, I did everything else in a climb cut, and it cut perfectly. You can also see that I'm wearing a back brace because I found out that my back was broken. So I wore that for about 3 months. I mixed up some fresh shellac and a 2-pound cut and used that on the veneer for 2 reasons. One, to color it a little bit, and one, to protect it from the glue for gluing the binding in place. We used a piece of curly maple and cut the binding, and this is just like I would do a guitar. Again with the drum sander to make sure that everything is dimensionally the same. And that's my rig for bending. I can bend guitar sides, binding, anything with that. So I wet the curly maple and then gently rock it in place. And obviously this is speeded up. I keep wetting it and rocking it and keep forming it until it gets soft enough to start bending, and ultimately it fits pretty good. I taped it in place so that it could dry and keep that shape. I used original Type Bond to glue the binding in place. When it was dry, I used a card scraper to scrape it level with the top and the front edge. And then came back and sanded, and you can see the sanding sealer on the top. Then I used the flush trim router bit to level the binding with the front edge. Then I came back and sanded everything again. I wanted to remove the shellac from the front edge and also level it, so I used a card scraper and then sanded. I assembled everything again, and now it's much easier that I can access the fasteners. Because I had to modify the design, I need to put the center channel speaker under the top shelf, so I'm measuring the height. I use cherry for that as well. Putting tension on the blade. Raising the guide. I wanted these to be 5/8 of an inch. This Laguna 14 SUV bandsaw is fantastic, by the way. And again with the drum sander. It was over 6 months ago when I last used the CNC, so it was time to surface the spoil board. After COVID, pneumonia, and broken back, not much got used in the shop. So I'm cutting out the center channel shelf support. This will also serve to support the top shelf and distribute the weight. I did not originally plan to have all the weight in the center of the shelf. I cut the first one without the dust shoe to show just how much of a mess it makes, and then with the dust shoe to show how clean it is if everything is working right. This is again at 175 inches per minute with a 1/4 inch compression bit. That's a lot cleaner. I do work for a trophy shop in town. They have 3 epilogue lasers, and I decided I wanted a movie reel cut on these shelf supports, so they cut those for me. I figured it would look better than cutting it on the CNC. And normally I get pretty good dust collection, but if you've got the wrong hose hooked up, I don't get any dust collection. Trimming for more supports and more time on the drum sander. Have to have a way to fasten these to the top shelf, and they'll just rest on the center shelf. Blue tape is obviously to make sure I don't drill all the way through. making the actual shelf, preparing the stock, then I'll resaw it to a 1/2 inch. The DRO, or digital readout, on the drum sander is an excellent add-on. I figured it was just as easy to cut the dados on the CNC as it would be to change the blade on the table saw. Here's a trial fit, and everything fit like it's supposed to. Making some walnut trim. Every good woodworking project has to have a little walnut, right? And tape is plenty adequate for gluing this on. And time to scrape the dry glue off. And again through the drum sander. Sanding all of the legs with 120 and the final sanding of the shelves. This is making sure everything is just right so I can spray. And again, using the 2-pound cut shellac to add some depth and richness to the Curly Koa and to make the Curly Maple binding pop a little bit. I think it's just gorgeous. And getting ready to spray sanding sealer on everything. So these already had one coat of sanding sealer. This is the second coat with the binding and edge veneer on. And this is with 220 sanding the sealer on the legs and the top. A lot of sanding. This is the first coat of lacquer, and I'm spraying semi-gloss. I would have sprayed gloss, but they didn't have any, so semi-gloss works just fine. And this is Sherwin-Williams semi-gloss lacquer. Very good lacquer. It lays down smooth. I put it on fairly heavy, and then I came back and sanded it with 400 grit. And sanded the legs with 400. And for those that are curious or have never sprayed lacquer, these were ready to handle within about 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops. I think I sanded them a few hours later. In some cases, I waited till the next day. And assembling it for what I hope to be the final time. Put a center support there under the front on the bottom. And gluing the medallions on. Just a few drops of glue is all it took. And blue tape makes a great clamp for something like this. So there is what I thought to be the finished shelf. I think the wood is just beautiful. You can see the movie reel, but with equipment in place, you won't see it. So I got to thinking about the weight. So I put 80 pounds on it, and it turns out that there was a little bit of deflection. I thought I needed a support between the middle shelf and the bottom shelf, but I didn't want it to show. So what I came up with is to make some books and use those to hide the support. The books apply to pretty much what I did to build this shelf. So again, back to the jointer, I cut some pieces of cherry, and again, drum sanded those. I rounded them somewhat to look like books, and prepared exotic veneers to be the binding. Because the veneers were somewhat wrinkled, I used the veneer softener and clamped it between two pieces of Baltic birch. Let it sit for a couple of hours. They came out good and flat. And again, with the same technique to brush the glue on, let it dry, and use an iron to apply. Everything came out really good. I was pleased. One piece of veneer was torn, so I used some veneer tape to glue it back together to hold it in place. You can see the glue, and it's ready to be applied. The first book came out just right. Used the Curly Koa. It only takes a couple of seconds for the iron to reheat the glue and cause the veneer to stick. And it works really good if you put the glue side down. If you put the glue side up, it will stick to that paper quicker than you can begin to think. If you put the glue side up, this is what you get. So I scraped all that off, reapplied the glue, put the right side down, and it worked perfectly. It's amazing how well it works when you do it right. My goal in making these books was not to make them perfect like I was doing a guitar headstock or something. My goal was to make these look like books that have been used a little bit. They weren't perfect. 2 of the books will get binding, Curly Maple and Walnut. And cutting the relief for the binding. And again, just tight bond with blue tape, and that's all it really needs. So once they were glued in place and glue was dry, then I could use a scraper and clean everything off and sand all of these. And once again, I used the 2-pound cut shellac to not only put a little finish on, but to give some coloration and enhance the figure in the grain. There's no point in using figured woods if you can't tell they're figured. And the shellac really makes this pop. So once those were finished, it was time to go back to the CNC and engrave the titles. The books were all the same thickness, but the veneer was different thickness. Each veneer was a few thousandths different. They were all within a few thousandths of each other, but I did the depth in several steps to get the look I wanted. And I think they came out looking nice. On books like encyclopedias and reference books, you frequently see gold lines, and I decided that these needed to have that as well. So I use a glue stick and some 24 karat gold leaf. I used the glue stick because I didn't want it to be perfect. I would have used a different glue. I actually have some glue made for this, for doing gold leaf, but I didn't want it perfect. One thing I was not aware of is how fast the glue stick dried. So I put it on all 5 books thinking that it would still be wet. It wasn't. So the first one worked okay, except that I had turned all the fans off in the shop except for the mini split, and I did not realize how hard it was blowing. You can see the paper moving. And the gold leaf was just trying to go everywhere. So after I did the second one, I realized that I needed to put some more glue on. So I'm glad I didn't remove the tape on all of them. And when I finished, it was a little too imperfect, so I used a piece of a coffee stirrer and scraped the excess gold leaf. Then I sprayed a coat of semi-gloss lacquer on top of the shellac. I needed a way to mount the books, and what I decided on was to use some rare earth magnets. So that's what these pieces of metal are for, is to provide the mounting for the books. And the books will be adjustable. I can rearrange them left and right in any order. These are just 1/16 inch thick rare earth magnets. And you can see the distribution of weight. So here's the variable mounting system for the books, the Dewey Decimal System, as it were. And mounting the books. The fun part to me is that the right-hand book says A Study in Symmetry, and it's that book that makes those books asymmetrical on the shelf. I got my son to come over to help me move this in place, put the TV in place. I let him get back there and hook up the wiring. So this is it in place with the lights on and off. And the finished stand. Next, we'll be making matching or complementary speaker stands. So again, thank you for watching. I hope you stuck around this long to see the end. It was a fun build. It did take a while, but it's finished. We're enjoying it. Subscribe, click on notifications. I may start doing videos again. It's been a while. Thank you for watching.